So the Sony XP500 is a decent little box speaker from Sony. However, I would mainly recommend this speaker to someone who plans on mostly using it while it's plugged in, because when it's unplugged while running off of its internal battery, sound quality wise, this speaker does leave you wanting more. However, we do gotta see how the XP500 stacks up to the JBL Partybox 100. Regarding pricing, both of these speakers retail for $350. However, if you are planning on getting the Partybox 100, just keep in mind the Partybox 110 is right around the corner. So personally, I would either try to hold off from getting the Partybox 100 right now, or at the very least, get it if it's on sale. Nonetheless, if you're going to pick either of these two speakers up, they'll be linked down below. Now, first let's talk about the design of these speakers. Now, both of these speakers have mostly plastic bodies, which can be a scratch magnet if you plan on taking them on the go with you, and they both have metal grills on the front. However, only the Sony has an IPX4 rating here, mainly because you can seal off all of its ports from the elements. Meaning that if this speaker gets a little wet or if it gets rained on, you don't gotta worry about it because a little bit of water isn't going to hurt it, just as long as the ports compartment on the back is sealed. Whereas with the Partybox, since all of these ports are exposed, you do risk water damage. Now, regarding portability, both of these speakers are a little under 2 feet tall, and when it comes to weight, the Partybox weighs in at 21.5 pounds, whereas the Sony weighs in at 24.7 pounds. And personally, I don't think this 3.2 pound difference is a big deal. However, one important detail that I do have to point out here is that with the Partybox, you can use it with a speaker stand, whereas with the Sony, you can't. Now, regarding these light features, the XP500 has a decent looking light feature, and I've also noticed that it has a good backsplashing effect. And through Sony's app, you've got a few different lighting modes to choose from. You've got delightful, rave, chill, and strobe. And through Sony's Fiestable app, you can customize this light feature. Whereas with the Partybox, there isn't an app for this light feature. However, I do feel that the light feature on the Partybox is more impressive than the light feature on the Sony XP500. It's more dynamic and it's brighter. But just keep in mind, if you do decide to use the light feature on either of these two speakers, it is going to take its toll on the battery life. But now let's talk about battery life on these speakers. The Sony XP500 has an advertised battery life of 20 hours, whereas the Partybox 100 has an advertised battery life of 12 hours. However, the XP500's advertised battery life of 20 hours is with it playing at 30% volume, with this light feature turned off, but with this mega bass feature turned on, which is good. However, 30% volume on this speaker is nothing. It's good for like ambiance, but it's not good for actually listening to music. Whereas with the Partybox, its advertised battery life of 12 hours is with it playing a little over 20% volume, but with this light feature turned off and with this bass boost feature turned off as well. However, 20% volume on the Partybox is noticeably louder than 30% volume on the XP500. And in general, the Sony XP500 is very quiet for its size when running off of its internal battery. So personally, I feel that most people will end up using the XP500 between 50 to 100% volume on a regular basis, whereas with the Partybox, 60 to 80% volume is a very good listening volume. So real-world use with the XP500 playing at 80% volume with its light feature turned on and with mega bass turned on, it's good for about 8 hours of playback time, which is fine. Whereas with the Partybox, with it playing at 65% volume, which is just as loud as the XP500 playing at 80% volume, with its light feature turned on and with bass boost set to level 1, it's also good for about 8 hours of playback time. So, even though at first glance the Sony XP500 has a much longer battery life than the Partybox 100, since I feel most people are going to have to use the XP500 at a higher volume than what they would with the Partybox 100, that's going to cause their battery life to drain faster. But also keep in mind, battery life on these speakers really depends on how you use them. If you have them playing at a higher volume, that's going to drain your battery life. If you have their light features turned on, that's going to drain your battery life. And if you have their bass features turned on, that's going to drain your battery life as well, especially with the Partybox, since you've got 3 levels of bass to choose from. But now let's talk about ports on these speakers. For starters, both of these speakers have two mic inputs, which could be a big deal for someone who might either want to do karaoke or for hosting small events. However, with the Partybox, you can add an echo to your mic. Now, I would never use this feature, but it's there. Next up are the USB-A ports on these speakers. The Partybox has one, whereas the XP500 has two. Nonetheless, you can charge your own devices if you're out and about, and you can play music off of a USB stick on either of these two speakers. Now, personally, I think it's great and all that both of these speakers have USB-A ports, but I still wish these speakers had USB-C ports so that you can charge your own devices or use it as a wired connection, because most new phones these days now come included with USB-C cables. Now, the Partybox does get a pass here, but I really wish the XP500 had that USB-C port because it just got released in the summer of 2021. However, both of these speakers still have your standard 3.5mm audio jack, so you can still use a wired connection with them. However, the Partybox has an audio in and audio out jack. So if you got a spare speaker lying around, regardless of brand, you can just daisy chain it to the Partybox and have them play in sync. However, it is important to point out that neither of these two speakers have RCA inputs. So if you're someone that likes to moonlight as a DJ, then you might want to pass on these. But when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, the XP500 is using Bluetooth 5.0, whereas the Partybox 100 is using Bluetooth 4.2. But more importantly, both of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ. They both have zero latency across the board when watching movies or videos on your phone. But when it comes to audio codecs, the Partybox only has support for SBC and AAC, whereas the XP500 has support for SBC, AAC, and Sony's own LDAC. But now let's talk about actually listening to music with these speakers. Both of these speakers have a pair of frontward firing woofers, and they both have a pair of frontward firing tweeters. And with either of these two speakers, whether you've got them laying down flat or standing upright, you've still got your left channel and your right channel. These speakers don't turn into a mono speaker if you've got them standing upright. Now, regarding mega bass and bass boost, with the XP500, if you're going to be listening to music, you want to have a mega bass turned on, because if not, the speaker sounds very flat. Whereas with the Partybox 100, even with its bass boost feature turned off, it still sounds pretty good. However, the bass boost has two levels to it. Now, personally, I think bass boost level 1 sounds best, but if you want more bass, you can always crank it up to bass boost level 2. But finally, with both of these speakers, if you were to use them while they're plugged in, you're going to get a performance boost out of them. However, the performance boost that you get out of the Sony XP500 is way more drastic than the performance boost that you get out of the Partybox 100. Now, I'll dive a little deeper into max volume in a minute, but for now, let's just jump into the sound test. Both of these speakers are playing while unplugged, but the XP500 is playing at 95% volume with the mega bass turned on, whereas the Partybox is playing at 75% volume, but with bass boost set to level 1.
I've never felt so alive in my life, 'cause you make me come to life every time. I'm free, oh, and I'm loving all that you do. Can't you see that I'm crashing right into you? That I'm crashing right into you. I'm free, oh, and I'm loving all that you do. Can't you see? Can you hear me calling for you? Yeah, I'm free falling, I'ma keep on falling for you. I'm free, oh, and I'm loving all that you do. Can't you see that I'm crashing right into you? I've never felt so alive in my life, 'cause you make me come to life every time. I'm free, oh, and I'm loving all that you do. Can't you see
So sound quality wise, I feel these speakers have the same instrument separation, but sound signature wise, the Partybox does put a little more emphasis on the mids, so vocals are a little more prominent on the Partybox. Now, if you want, you can always bring the mids out a little bit on the Sony through Sony's app, because Sony lets you adjust the EQ on their speakers, whereas with JBL, you can't directly adjust their EQ. Now, overall, both of these speakers sound good, but the main performance difference here is just going to be volume. Like I mentioned earlier, the XP500 was playing at 95% volume, whereas the Partybox was playing at 75% volume. And like I mentioned in the full review, at max volume off of its internal battery, the XP500 really leaves you wanting more relative to its size. The XP500 playing at max volume is like having the Sony XG500 playing at max volume as well. Now, for its size and portability, the XG500 gets decently loud, but the XP500, not so much. Whereas with the Partybox 100, it gets decently loud for its size while playing off of its internal battery. However, if you use the XP500 while it's plugged in, that's when it finally wakes up and it starts to sound and perform more like what you'd expect. Now, you also get a performance bump out of the Partybox while it's plugged in, but it's not as drastic as the Sony XP500. However, even while it's plugged in, the Partybox 100 still gets a little louder than the XP500. But overall, I like how both of these speakers sound. They both have good instrument separation and they both have a good amount of wall shaking bass. However, the Partybox does like to put a little more emphasis on the mids than the Sony by default. However, with the Sony, if you want to get the most out of it, you really want to use it while it's plugged in. Whereas with the Partybox, it's going to get decently loud whether you've got it plugged in or while it's running off of its internal battery. But finally, let's talk about speaker pairing protocols. The Sony XP500 is using Sony's new Party Connect, meaning that you can pair it up to other Sony Party Connect speakers, like either another Sony XP500 and or to an XP700. But the thing about Sony's Party Connect is that you can pair your larger box speakers to your smaller, more portable speakers. So you can also pair the XP500 up to, let's say, an XG500, XB43, XB33, and even an XB23. Whereas with the Partybox 100, you can only wirelessly pair it up to one other Partybox 100. You can't pair it up to any other Partyboxes. And unfortunately, you can't pair any Partyboxes to any of JBL's smaller JBL Partyboost speakers. However, like I mentioned earlier, the Partybox does have that audio out jack, so you can always daisy chain one other speaker to it. So there's that. But like I mentioned in the past, I just wish JBL would just add Party Boost to their Partybox speakers. Overall, the main selling point of Sony's Party Connect is that you can pair your larger box speakers to your smaller, more portable speakers. And in general, Sony's Party Connect gets the job done, but it's not my favorite speaker pairing protocol. It's not as easy to use. Sometimes not all of your speakers get found, and sometimes you will hear a little bit of stuttering. So with all that being said, if you're trying to choose between either of these two speakers, sound quality wise, I gotta go with the Partybox 100 because it gets significantly louder than the Sony XP500 while running off of its internal battery. But also, the Partybox does have the better looking light feature and you can always use it with a speaker stand if you want. But if you're not concerned about your speaker getting super loud, or if you're okay with having your speaker plugged in most of the time, then the Sony XP500 is a solid pickup as well. And the XP500 does have some major pros over the Partybox 100 as well. You don't gotta worry about the ports on the back getting water damage because you can seal them off. You can directly adjust the EQ on this speaker if you want. And if you have other Sony speakers lying around that are using Party Connect, you can pair them up to the XP500. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any other products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.